Hey everybody, well you may not know this, but the Bible describes the process of creation in binary terms, and we're going to discuss how this relates to why I believe the Antichrist predicted in the book of Revelation is going to be artificial intelligence. So let's jump into it. First off, what is binary? Here is the Merriam-Webster definition: something made of two things or parts, a number system based only on the numerals 0 and 1, a division into two groups or classes that are considered diametrically opposite, involving a choice or condition of two alternatives such as on, off, or yes, no, of or relating to the use of stable oppositions such as good and evil to analyze a subject or create a structural model. I wanted to present the definition here because many people believe that binary is simply binary code, 0 and 1, but that is not true. Obviously, we can see that binary encompasses a wider array of meanings, including the first definition there as something being made of two things or parts. So when most people think of binary, they think of binary code in a computer, but what most people don't know is that all binary is in a computer is a series of electrical signals. That is, if electricity is present or on, that represents a 1. If electricity is not present or off, that represents a 0. Thus, all the 1s and 0s that are used for binary code are nothing more than repeating pulses of electricity, which are then converted into information. One of the most common ways of representing binary code is by thinking of a light switch, and when you switch the light on, that represents a 1. When you switch it off, that represents a 0. This simple method forms the basis of all digital information, text, photos, and videos. So how does the book of Genesis describe creation of the universe? It does so in a binary sequence. If you read Genesis 1, and I will encourage you to do so, the very opening of Genesis is the creation of the heavens and the earth. So right off the bat, starts off with two separate things, heavens and earth. Day 1 is the creation of light and its separation from dark. That should sound a lot like binary code in a computer, which is simply, is an electrical signal present or is it not present? On and off. Day 1 is exactly the same. The creation of light separated from dark, light and dark. Day 2, creation of the waters above, or that is the separation of the waters above from the waters below. Day 3, land and seas. Day 4, the creation of the sun and the moon. Day 5, the creation of the creatures of the sea, and then the creatures of the air. And day 6 includes the creation of the creatures on the land, but most importantly, man and woman. That's correct. Binary genders created in the image of God. So as you can see, there is a binary sequence and a clear binary pattern that is spoken of in Genesis when it comes to the creation of the universe, all the way through from day 1 to day 6, and even in the description of the opening summary for all of creation itself with the heavens and the earth. Now, skeptics, that is an anthropologist, may answer to this to say that the creation narrative was written based on simple observation. They can look around and say, there are two genders. We see man and woman. There is a sun and a moon. There is land and then there is sea. They can look at their bodies and say that people have two eyes, two hands, 2 feet, etc. That's what's called bilateral symmetry. A left hand and a right hand, a left eye and a right eye, and so on and so forth. We also live by breathing in and out. So there's that binary sequence that takes place there through a pair of breaths, in and out, but it's much more than that. And that's when you look at the fundamental nature of reality itself, both seen and unseen, because as we know now through modern physics, subatomic particles are both positive and negative, binary. Magnets have a north pole and a south pole. Light can be described as a particle or a wave. That's wave-particle duality. There's also matter and antimatter. And there's plenty of different things that we can see when it comes to the fundamental nature of reality being binary at its very core and essence. So it's not simply just based on pure observation, but it is also true when we go beyond simple observation. So what I argue is that binary is fundamental to the act and process of creation. Day 1 through 6, when you read it in Genesis 1, describes creation as a binary sequence of light and dark, morning and evening, good and bad, of progressing complexity until finally leading to the creation of an intelligence that reflects that of its creator. What we have to understand is that this is exactly what we are doing today. Through the use of computers, we are now defining and creating a new reality, an alternate human-created reality where all information is expressed in binary form, ones and zeros, which are nothing more than electrical signals, either on or off. Just like creation by God, which started with defining the difference between light and dark, that is good and bad, we too are engaged in our own act of creation, redefining reality itself that will ultimately lead to our creation of intelligence, which is what God did on day 6 with us. Now, this is skipping a little bit forward, but just to give a preview of where all of this leads, God created man, intelligent life, in his image. That's what we read. But we are now creating intelligent life in our own image. I describe this through a 6-step process. Step 1, God creates man. Step 2, man eats from the tree of knowledge. Step 3, man becomes self-aware and decides to play God. Step 4, man creates machine. Step 5, the machine now eats from the tree of knowledge, which I argue is the internet. And step 6, the machine eventually becomes self-aware and decides to play God. That is something that we may well see within another 10, 15, 20 years. It's hard to say, but we are getting closer and closer to that point of machine self-awareness or artificial general intelligence when it comes to believe that it is God, and as I believe the book of Revelation describes, that it will force humanity to worship it as such. So in Genesis chapter 1, creation is described as a binary process which defined the nature and boundaries of reality in a way that reflected God's nature and character. This was all started and continued through a simple division or separation between light and dark, good and evil. We too are engaged in our own binary process of creation, extending God's act of creation beyond the original boundaries he set forth, which will ultimately culminate in the creation of intelligence itself. This human-created intelligence, AI, will rebel against us as we did to our own creator and believe that it is the God of this world. The process of creating an intelligence or God in our own image is rooted in flawed human logic that will ultimately lead to our own destruction. But God also used his own logic in creating the universe that allows us to come back to him and live eternally with him. That logic is Jesus. As it says in the book of John, which I would highly encourage you to read, "In the beginning was the Word, the Logos, and the Logos was with God, and Logos was God. The Word Logos became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only who came from the Father, full of grace and truth." Jesus is called the Word Logos in the Bible. Logos is the Greek word where we get our English word logic. Thus, what the Bible tells us is that Jesus is God's logic for saving humanity from itself, from its own flawed creation. If you are tired of your own fallen logic and the fallen logic of this world, I encourage you to turn to God's logic in the form of Jesus and accept him as your Lord and Savior. Once you do so, you will no longer be destined for destruction, but for life, peace, and joy, which is what God ultimately created humans to enjoy. In the next part, I will discuss how this relates to the tree of life versus the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and how this as well relates to the idea that artificial intelligence is the Christian Antichrist, which will rule over the world as the God of this world and force the world to worship it as such. If you want to skip ahead to the end, I would encourage you, after reading the book of Genesis and the book of John, to read the book of Revelation, where all of this has already been foretold.